The click of the Cartier lock on the deep blue velvet box was the only sound Amelia Croft could hear over the frantic beating of her own heart. Inside wasn't a jewel, but a detonation device, metaphorically speaking. Each item was a carefully chosen piece of shrapnel aimed at the heart of a lie. Tonight, her husband, the real estate magnate Julian Croft, was celebrating their 5th wedding anniversary. The only problem was he was celebrating with another woman in a ballroom full of their city's elite, while Amelia, his 7 months pregnant wife, sat across town holding the gift that would end it all. This wasn't just a breakup. It was a meticulously planned demolition. The penthouse apartment on the 72nd floor of a gleaming Manhattan skyscraper was less a home and more a testament to Julian Croft's ego. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic vista of Central Park, a living painting that changed with the seasons. The air was perpetually scented with a custom blend of white tea and peonies, and the silence was broken only by the whisper of the climate control system or the distant, muted wail of a Serena sound that reminded its occupants how far removed they were from the grit of the city below. This was Amelia's cage, albeit a breathtakingly beautiful one. For the past 5 years, she had played her part to perfection, the elegant, supportive wife of a titan. She hosted flawless dinner parties, charmed investors with her knowledge of art and literature, and stood by his side at countless galas, a serene smile fixed on her face. She had believed in their fairy tale, a story of a brilliant, ambitious man who had swept a quiet librarian off her feet. He had loved her intellect, he'd said, her calm in his storm. But lately, the silence in the penthouse felt different. It was heavier, colder. It was the silence of unspoken words and a growing, gnawing suspicion. It started with small things. The scent of an unfamiliar perfume, a floral blend far too cloying to be hers, clinging to his suit jackets. The late-night, board meetings that became more frequent. The second phone, the one he called his international line, that would vibrate with a frantic buzz before he'd silence it with a sharp, irritated flick of his thumb. Amelia, 7 months into a high-risk pregnancy that had taken them years and a small fortune in fertility treatments to achieve, had tried to ignore it. She blamed her hormones, the anxiety of impending motherhood. Julian was under immense pressure, closing the deal on his most audacious project yet, the Olympus Tower, a spire of glass and steel that would redefine the skyline. Of course, he was distracted. Of course, he was working late. But the lies were becoming sloppier, the excuses thinner. Last week, he claimed to be in a late-night negotiation with Japanese investors. A friend, however, had sent her a picture from an exclusive new restaurant opening, and there in the background was Julian. He was laughing, leaning intimately toward a woman with raven black hair and a dress the color of blood. The woman was Isabella Rossi, a fiercely ambitious art consultant who had burst onto the New York social scene like a supernova. Amelia had met her once at a gallery event. She remembered Isabella's handshake firm, almost challenging in the way her eyes had scanned Amelia from head to toe, a flicker of something cold and dismissive in their depths. The final, gut-wrenching confirmation had come 2 days ago. Julian had been in the shower when his international phone, carelessly left on his nightstand, lit up. A single message glowed on the screen. Isabella, counting the seconds until our anniversary. This year feels like the real one. I've booked the grand ballroom at the St. Regis, just like we always dreamed. I love you, Jay. Our anniversary. The words had knocked the air from Amelia's lungs. Their actual anniversary was tonight. A quiet dinner at home, he had said. He had to fly to Chicago in the morning for an early meeting, so they couldn't do anything extravagant. He had kissed her forehead, his hand resting briefly on her swollen belly. Next year, Angel. Next year, we'll celebrate with our son. The hypocrisy was a physical blow. While he was promising her a quiet night, he and Isabella were planning a lavish celebration at the St. Regis, one of New York's most iconic and public luxury hotels. They weren't just having an affair. They were creating an entirely separate life, a perverse parody of the one he shared with her. For a full day, Amelia was paralyzed by grief, so profound it felt like a physical illness. The man she loved, the father of her unborn child, was a stranger. The life she had built was a facade. The future she had envisioned: strolls in the park with their son, quiet family holidays, growing old together, crumbled into dust. She wandered the vast, empty rooms of the penthouse, her hand protectively on her stomach, tears streaming down her face. The baby kicked, a small, insistent reminder of a life that was intrinsically tied to this web of deceit. And then, as the sun set on the second day, the grief began to curdle. It hardened, sharpened, and transmuted into something else entirely, a cold, crystalline rage. He wasn't just going to leave her. He wasn't just going to get away with it. She would not be the quiet, dignified victim who disappeared with a settlement and a broken heart. He had chosen to humiliate her, to build a life on her trust, and then shatter it in the most public way imaginable. So, the end would not be a quiet whisper in a lawyer's office. It would be a symphony of destruction, played out on his stage, in front of his audience. She picked up her phone, her hands no longer shaking. She didn't call her lawyer. Not yet. She called the one person she knew would understand the need for something more than justice, the need for retribution. "Chloe," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, "I need your help. I need to burn something to the ground." Chloe, Amelia's younger sister, arrived at the penthouse within the hour. She was the antithesis of Amelia's polished serenity, a freelance investigative journalist with a shock of spiky, dyed purple hair, a collection of tattoos peeking from under her leather jacket, and an expression that permanently hovered between cynicism and amusement. Where Amelia saw the best in people, Chloe looked for the cracks. She found her sister sitting on a white silk sofa, surrounded by pillows, looking like a tragic queen on a throne of lies. Chloe didn't offer platitudes or hugs. She walked straight to the marble-topped bar, poured 2 glasses of sparkling water, and handed one to Amelia. "Okay," Chloe said, sinking into an armchair opposite her. "Tell me everything, and don't leave out the ugly parts." Amelia did. She recounted the lingering perfume, the second phone, the photo, and finally, the devastating text message. As she spoke, the last of her tears dried up, replaced by a steely resolve. Chloe listened intently, her sharp eyes missing nothing. When Amelia finished, Chloe was silent for a long moment, tapping a finger against her glass. "The St. Regis," Chloe finally said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face. "The arrogant son of a bitch. He's not just cheating, he's performing. He's putting on a show for the whole damn city to see who he really wants to be with. He thinks you're just a set piece, the pregnant wife tucked away at home. He told me he had to go to Chicago." Amelia whispered, the lies still tasting like ash. "Of course he did," Chloe scoffed. "So what's the plan? You want to expose him? Ruin him? What's the endgame?" "I want a divorce," Amelia said, the word feeling solid and real for the first time. "But I don't want to file it quietly. I want him to receive the news tonight at his party, in front of her, in front of everyone." Poetic, Chloe mused. "But divorce papers are boring. They're just paper. We need theater. We need something that will be seared into the memory of every person in that ballroom. We need to give him a gift." And so the plan was born. In the gleaming, sterile heart of Julian's empire, the 2 sisters became architects of ruin. For the next several hours, the penthouse transformed from a silent museum of wealth into a war room. Their weapon of choice would be a beautifully wrapped gift box, not from a generic store, but from one of Amelia's favorite boutiques one Julian would recognize. It had to look legitimate, like a celebratory gift from an absent well-wisher. First, the box itself, Chloe strategized, pacing the vast living room. It has to be big, substantial, something that draws attention when it's carried through the ballroom. They settled on a large navy blue box from a luxury stationer on Madison Avenue, tied with a thick silver silk ribbon. The card would be crucial. It should be addressed to him, Amelia said, and the message should be ambiguous at first. Chloe grabbed a sheet of heavy cream cardstock from Julian's own study. In her most elegant cursive, Amelia wrote, "To Julian, I know you're celebrating something special tonight, a 5th anniversary. I couldn't let the occasion pass without sending a little something to mark the moment. This box contains everything that defines our 5 years together. With all that I am. A. Devastatingly simple, Chloe approved. He'll think it's from you, that you're playing along with his quiet night in story. He'll be confused. Perfect. Now for the contents. This would be the shrapnel. Each item had to tell a part of the story, building to a crescendo of humiliation. Item 1. The foundation of lies. At the very bottom of the box, they placed a single, perfect brick. Chloe had sourced it that afternoon from a construction site. It was heavy, rough, and real. On it, Amelia wrote in permanent silver marker, "The first brick of the Olympus Tower, or perhaps the first brick in the wall you built between us." Item 2. The scent of betrayal. Next came a bottle of perfume. Chloe had managed to identify the scent Isabella wore, a niche, outrageously expensive fragrance called Sillage de Reine, the Queen's Wake. Amelia bought a brand new bottle and emptied half of it onto a beautiful Hermes scarf Julian had bought her for her birthday last year. The cloying floral scent now reeked of infidelity. She enclosed the receipt for the perfume with the name circled. Item 3. The broken promises. On top of the scarf, she placed the velvet box that had held her engagement ring. It was empty. Beside it, she laid the keys to the classic Aston Martin DB he had given her for their second anniversary, a car she had adored. There was also the original architectural sketch of the penthouse itself, which he had presented to her as our sanctuary. Each item was a symbol of a promise now rendered meaningless. Item 4. The financial blow. This was Chloe's contribution. Through a contact, she had gotten a preliminary, unverified report on some creative accounting practices within Croft Holdings related to the Olympus project. It was nothing concrete enough to be illegal yet, but it was enough to spook investors. She printed the document and placed it in a stark manila envelope labeled, "For the board's consideration." It was a seed of professional doubt, a ticking time bomb for his company. Item 5. The final detonation. This was the most important piece, the centerpiece of their revenge. Amelia took the latest ultrasound picture of their son. The image was clear, showing a perfectly formed tiny human. Her baby, their baby, the one he claimed to want more than anything, the heir to the Croft dynasty. Using the same silver pen, she wrote directly on the image, just below the baby's profile, a message that was both a declaration and a curse. "You said you were building an empire for him. Looks like you were too busy building a new life with her. You won't know him. You won't raise him. You won't be his father. This is the last time you will ever see our son. Happy anniversary." She then took her wedding ring, a flawless 5-carat diamond that had once felt like the center of her universe, and taped it carefully to the corner of the ultrasound photo. They packed the box with meticulous care, layering the items with black tissue paper. The brick at the bottom gave it a deceptive weight. The perfume-soaked scarf will be the first thing to assault the senses upon opening. Then the symbols of their shared life, followed by the threat to his professional one, and finally, the ultimate personal gut punch. As Chloe tied the final, perfect bow, she looked at her sister. Amelia's face was pale, but her eyes were blazing. She was no longer a victim. She was a woman taking back her power. "We need a delivery service," Chloe said. "Someone professional, anonymous." "I have someone," Amelia replied, a plan already in place. She called the white glove courier service Julian used for all his most sensitive documents, using his own account. The irony was exquisite. His own infrastructure would be used to deliver his downfall. She scheduled the delivery for 9:30 p.m., sharp the peak of the party, the moment when speeches would likely be made and all eyes would be on the happy couple. As the courier came to collect the heavy, beautiful, terrible box, Amelia felt a strange sense of peace descend upon her. The storm inside her had passed. Now, she was the storm. The grand ballroom of the St. Regis was a symphony of old-world opulence and modern excess. Cascading crystal chandeliers dripped light onto a sea of beautifully dressed people, their laughter mingling with the smooth sounds of a live jazz quartet. The air hummed with power, ambition, and the clinking of champagne flutes. A mountain of champagne, a tower of glistening glasses, stood in the center of the room, flowing with Dom Perignon. Julian Croft stood near that tower, a king in his court. He was immaculate in a custom Tom Ford tuxedo, his smile as bright and flawless as the diamond studs on his shirt. At his side, Isabella Rossi was a vision in a crimson gown that clung to her like a second skin. A diamond necklace gift from Julian that Amelia would have recognized as the one he'd claimed was a corporate gift for a client's wife sparkled at her throat. Together, they were intoxicating. They moved through the crowd with an easy, practiced grace, accepting congratulations and compliments. The cover story was that this was a party celebrating the topping off of the Olympus Tower. But the inner circle, the ones who mattered, knew the truth. They had been told it was a celebration of Julian and Isabella's partnership. The ambiguity was deliberate, a soft launch of their relationship. Julian, darling, the tower is magnificent, gushed as society didn't, dripping in sapphires. But your greatest asset is standing right beside you. Julian beamed, squeezing Isabella's hand. I couldn't agree more, Beatrice. Isabella has been inspirational. Isabella's smile was radiant, but her eyes were sharp, calculating. She saw the glances. She heard the whispers. Where's Amelia? Isn't he still married? She knew tonight was a gamble. It was her declaration of victory. She had won. The pregnant, mousy wife was at home, oblivious, while she, Isabella, stood beside the man she considered hers, in the spotlight where she belonged. She had orchestrated his life for the past year with the precision of a master strategist. She had manufactured their chance meeting at the gallery, researched his weakness as a desperate need for validation, a secret fear of mediocrity, and positioned herself as his intellectual and passionate equal. Everything his quiet wife was not. A speech, Julian. We need a speech, someone called out. Julian raised a hand, quieting the crowd. He stepped onto a small, elevated platform, pulling Isabella with him. The jazz quartet softened to a barely there hum. Thank you all for coming, he began, his voice smooth and confident, resonating through the ballroom. Tonight, we celebrate the future. We celebrate bold visions and new horizons with the Olympus Tower. But no man builds an empire alone. He turned to Isabella, his gaze full of what looked, to the untrained eye, like genuine adoration. I want to thank this incredible woman, Isabella Rossi. Her vision, her passion, she reminds me every day that the most beautiful structures aren't just built of steel and glass, but of courage and dreams. The crowd applauded wildly. It was the confirmation they were all waiting for. This was the new power couple. Isabella's heart swelled with triumph. She lifted her champagne flute, her eyes locking with Julian's over the rim. Julian was about to continue, to offer a toast, when he was interrupted. A waiter was conferring quietly with the hotel manager near the grand entrance. The manager then approached the stage, looking apologetic. Mr. Croft, my apologies for the interruption. A special delivery has just arrived for you. Julian frowned slightly. A delivery? Now. Yes, sir. From a high-priority courier. The instructions were to deliver it to you personally at exactly 9:30. A ripple of curiosity went through the room. A mid-party secret delivery. How intriguing. Isabella preened. She assumed it was a lavish, over-the-top gift from a fawning business associate or perhaps a fellow socialite trying to curry favor. Well, don't keep us in suspense, darling, she purred, loud enough for those nearby to hear. Let's see it. The manager nodded, and two bellhops in immaculate uniforms walked through the crowd, carrying a large, navy blue box tied with a silver ribbon. It was elegant, expensive, and undeniably conspicuous. They placed it on a small table brought to the foot of the stage. Julian stepped down, a slight smile of amusement on his face. He recognized the branding from the stationery boutique Amelia's favorite. A strange feeling, a tiny prickle of unease, went through him. He told her he was going to Chicago. He had her tucked away, safe and sound, out of sight. Maybe this was a surprise, a sweet, loving gesture. Perhaps she'd found out he was staying in town and sent a gift for the Olympus party, playing the supportive wife even from afar. The thought almost made him feel guilty, but he quickly pushed it down. He picked up the heavy cream cardstock. To Julian, I know you're celebrating something special tonight. A 5th anniversary. His blood ran cold. Our 5th anniversary. How'd she know? The words swam before his eyes. I couldn't let the occasion pass without sending a little something to mark the moment. This box contains everything that defines our 5 years together. With all that I am, A. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was not a loving gesture. The sign off, with all that I am, was something she used to write in their early days, a phrase full of sincerity and love. Now it felt like a threat. Well, open it, Isabella prompted, her voice bright and impatient. She stepped down from the platform to stand beside him, placing a proprietary hand on his arm. The crowd leaned in, their phones subtly angled, ready to capture the moment. Julian's hands felt clumsy as he fumbled with the perfect silver ribbon. The air in the ballroom was thick with anticipation. He had a sudden, overwhelming urge to have the box taken away, to open it in private. But it was too late. All eyes were on him. He was the king in his castle, and he had to open the gift. He had to maintain control. With a final tug, the ribbon came loose. Julian lifted the lid of the box. The first thing that hit him was the smell. A cloying, overwhelmingly floral perfume. A scent he knew intimately, but one that should never, ever be in a box from his wife. The party of lies was about to come crashing down. The scent of sillage de reine bloomed from the box, an invisible cloud of accusation that seemed to suck the oxygen out of the immediate vicinity. Julian froze, the lid in his hand. He smelled Isabella's signature scent, but it was coming from a box sent by Amelia. The cognitive dissonance was a physical jolt. Isabella, recognizing her own expensive perfume, looked confused for a second, and then a smug, self-satisfied smile touched her lips. She thought it was a clever, anonymous gift meant for her. "Oh, Julian, someone has expensive taste," she murmured, reaching into the box. Her fingers brushed against silk. "What is this?" "An Hermes scarf." She pulled it out. The iconic orange and blue pattern of the scarf was unmistakable. Julian felt a pit form in his stomach. He had given that exact scarf to Amelia for her 30th birthday. He remembered the look of quiet joy on her face. Now it was drenched in his mistress's perfume, a tangible symbol of his betrayal. Tucked into its folds was a small, crisp piece of paper, the receipt for the perfume. Isabella's name wasn't on it, but the name of the fragrance was clearly printed. A few guests nearby, women who prided themselves on knowing such things, recognized the name and gasped. Whispers began to ripple outwards. Julian's face was a mask of strained composure. An interesting gesture, he managed, trying to steer the situation. He attempted to put the lid back on the box. "Perhaps we should look at this later." "Nonsense, a boisterous investor, a man named Marcus Thorne," boomed from the front of the crowd. "Let's see what else is in there. Don't be shy, Croft." "Trapped." Julian reached into the box himself, his hand closing around something hard and cold. He pulled out the empty, velvet-covered ring box from Cartier. He opened it, revealing the empty indentation where Amelia's magnificent engagement ring used to sit. Next, his fingers found the cool, heavy metal of the Aston Martin keys, and finally, the rolled-up sketch of their home. The crowd was now silent. This was no longer a celebration. It was a bizarre, unfolding drama. The items made no sense as gifts. They were a strange collection of personal effects. But Julian understood. Oh, he understood perfectly. These were the things that had built their life. She was returning them. Isabella's smile had vanished. Her face was hardening, her eyes darting between Julian's pale face and the strange assortment of items. She saw the empty ring box, and a flash of fury crossed her features. Where was the ring? Was he giving it to her? The thought was a brief, hopeful spark before the dawning, horrifying realization that something was terribly wrong. "Julian, what is this?" she hissed, her voice a low, dangerous whisper only he could hear. He ignored her, his hand diving back into the box, desperate to get to the bottom of it, to end this surreal nightmare. His fingers brushed against a plain manila envelope. He pulled it out. For the board's consideration. His blood turned to ice. He knew without even opening it that this was a professional attack. He shoved the envelope into his tuxedo pocket, his movements jerky. And then he saw it. At the bottom of the box, nestled in the black tissue paper, was the last item. It wasn't an object, but a photograph. An ultrasound. He lifted it out, his hand trembling visibly now. The black and white image was stark under the ballroom lights, a tiny, perfect profile. His son, the heir he'd been obsessed with creating, the legacy he'd pontificated about for years. And then he saw the writing, the elegant, familiar cursive sharp as a shard of glass, written in silver ink across the image. You said you were building an empire for him. Looks like you were too busy building a new life with her. You won't know him. You won't raise him. You won't be his father. This is the last time you will ever see our son. Happy anniversary. The words hit Julian with the force of a physical blow. He stumbled back a step, gasping for air. This wasn't just a threat. It was a verdict, an execution of his future. Isabella, her patience gone, snatched the photo from his numb fingers. She read the message. Her perfectly made-up face contorted into a mask of pure rage. Her shriek cut through the stunned silence of the ballroom. Her son? Our son? What is this, Julian? She screamed, her voice cracking with fury and humiliation. She wasn't his partner in a new life. She was the homewrecker, publicly exposed. And then, as if on cue, a single, dazzling point of light caught everyone's eye. Taped to the corner of the ultrasound, right next to the devastating message, was the 5-carat diamond wedding ring. It glittered under the chandeliers, a final, brilliant exclamation point on the death of their marriage. It wasn't just returned. It was affixed to the evidence of his greatest betrayal. The collective gasp of the crowd was a physical force. Phones, which had been subtly filming, were now held aloft openly, their red recording lights like 100 malevolent eyes. The whispers exploded into audible chatter. The carefully constructed facade of the evening goth Julian Croft's entire life had not just cracked. It had been detonated. In his panic, Julian did the worst possible thing. He turned on Isabella. "This is your fault," he snarled, his voice a raw, ugly thing. "Your ridiculous public party." "My fault?" she shrieked back, shoving him. "You told me she was a quiet little mouse. You told me it was over. You lied to me." The final item in the box, hitherto unnoticed, lay at the very bottom. The heavy, rough brick from the Olympus Tower construction site. As Isabella shoved him, Julian stumbled against the table, tipping the box. The brick tumbled out, landing on the polished marble floor with a loud, definitive crack. It lay there amidst the scattered tissue paper, the silver words, "The first brick in the wall you built," between us gleaming up at the horrified faces staring down. It was over. The party, the marriage, the carefully crafted image of Julian Croft, titan of industry, all of it shattered on the floor of the St. Regis ballroom. The aftermath was chaos. Not loud, screaming chaos, but the far more damning kind. A swift, silent exodus. Within minutes of the brick hitting the floor, the grand ballroom began to empty. There was no music, no laughter, only the rustle of expensive fabrics and the staccato clicking of heels on marble as guests fled the scene of the social crime. They didn't want to be caught in the blast radius, but they carried the story with them, clutching it like a precious, scandalous jewel. Before they even reached their cars, the digital guillotine was falling. The videos started to appear, first on Instagram stories, grainy and shaky, then on Twitter, sharper and with devastating captions. Croft collapse. Anniversary gift from hell. St. Regis scandal. The hashtag spread like wildfire. The video of Isabella shrieking, of Julian's panicked, accusatory face, of the glittering diamond ring taped to the ultrasound was social media gold. Memes were already being generated. A screenshot of the brick with Amelia's message became an instant symbol of epic revenge. Back in the ballroom, Julian stood frozen amidst the wreckage. A few loyal employees hovered uncertainly at the edges of the room, unsure of what to do. The hotel manager, his face a mask of pained professionalism, was quietly directing his staff to clear the abandoned champagne glasses. Isabella was gone. After her initial furious outburst, she had looked at Julian with pure contempt, her eyes promising a war of their own. Then, with as much dignity as she could muster, she had gathered the shreds of her pride and swept out of the ballroom, ignoring the forest of phones that tracked her every move. Julian finally moved. He stumbled to the table and snatched up the ultrasound photo, staring at the silver words that had sealed his fate. You won't be his father. The finality of it was absolute. He had been so obsessed with building a legacy, an empire to pass on, that he had carelessly, arrogantly torched the very legacy he claimed to be building it for. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over Amelia's name. He called. It went straight to voicemail. The number already blocked. He tried the penthouse landline. No answer. He felt a surge of pure, impotent rage. He wanted to scream at her, to demand. What? An explanation? She had given him the most eloquent, brutal explanation imaginable. Across town, in a minimalist rented apartment Chloe kept for work, the two sisters watched the fallout on a laptop. They didn't speak. They just watched the view counts on the videos climb into the tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. They scrolled through the comments. OMG, Amelia Croft is my new hero. He got exactly what he deserved. The brick was a masterstroke. That poor woman, pregnant and betrayed. I hope she takes him for everything he's worth. Isabella Rossi's career suicide party, sponsored by Cartier and Dom Perignon. Amelia felt no elation, no joy, just a hollow, grim satisfaction, the feeling of a surgeon who has just completed a radical but necessary amputation. The limb was gone. The pain was immense. But the poison had been cut out. Chloe finally broke the silence. The manila envelope was a nice touch, she said, a hint of professional admiration in her voice. The first call Julian makes tomorrow won't be to a marriage counselor. It'll be to his CFO. The board will be in a panic. Amelia leaned her head back against the sofa, her hand resting on her belly. The baby was quiet, as if sensing the tectonic shift in his own future. It's done, she whispered. No, Chloe said, turning to her, her expression serious. This is just the end of the battle. The war starts tomorrow. He's going to fight back. He's going to be vicious. He's a cornered animal now. Amelia nodded slowly. I know, but for the first time in years, I'm not afraid. He built his empire on a foundation of lies. I just showed everyone the cracks. Her phone, a new burner phone Chloe had insisted she get, buzzed. It was a message from a number she didn't recognize. Her heart leaped, thinking it was Julian somehow. But the message wasn't from him. It was from Marcus Thorne, the boisterous investor who had egged Julian on. He was one of the key backers of the Olympus Tower, a man whose support was critical. The message was short and to the point. Mrs. Croft, I am appalled by what I witnessed tonight. A man who manages his personal life with such catastrophic dishonesty cannot be trusted to manage my money. I am pulling my funding from the Olympus project, effective immediately. I wish you and your son the very best. Amelia showed the message to Chloe. Chloe let out a low whistle. It's happening, she said. The first brick in his empire just crumbled. The demolition, it turned out, was just beginning. The next 48 hours were a blur of cascading consequences for Julian Croft. The St. Regis scandal was no longer just society gossip. It was a full-blown financial news story. Major outlets like the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg ran articles not just about the salacious details of the party, but about the immediate, tangible fallout. Marcus Thorne's public withdrawal of his 9-figure investment in the Olympus Tower created a crisis of confidence. The manila envelope, Amelia's masterstroke of psychological warfare, had done its job perfectly. Though the documents inside were merely suggestive, the idea that Julian was hiding financial irregularities, coupled with his spectacular personal implosion, was enough. The board of Croft Holdings convened an emergency meeting. Julian, haggard and unshaven, faced them in the sterile boardroom on the 50th floor of his current flagship building. The mood was glacial. The men and women who had once lauded his genius now looked at him as if he were a liability. The optics, Julian, are catastrophic, said the board chairman, a stern man named Richard Sterling. Our stock has dipped 12% in morning trading. Our lenders are getting nervous. Your personal life has become a direct threat to this company's stability. It was a private matter, Julian argued weakly, the words sounding hollow even to his own ears. You made it public, another board member snapped. You held a party with your mistress to celebrate your anniversary, and your pregnant wife had to send you a gift to get your attention. There is nothing private about that. It shows a staggering lack of judgment, a recklessness that we now have to assume bleeds into your business decisions. The manila envelope was brought up. Julian tried to dismiss it as the ramblings of a scorned woman, but the seed of doubt had been planted. The board voted to launch an immediate, independent audit of the Olympus Towers finances. Effective immediately, Julian was asked to take a leave of absence, pending the results of the audit. He was being pushed out of his own company. The empire he had built to honor his own name was casting him out to save itself. His personal life was in even greater ruins. Isabella, after a day of silence, had launched her own counteroffensive. She gave an exclusive interview to a sympathetic journalist, painting herself as the victim. She claimed Julian had been emotionally abusive, that he had promised her for a year that his marriage was a sexless, loveless sham, and that he was on the verge of filing for divorce. She claimed to be heartbroken and manipulated. It was a desperate, self-serving performance, but it further painted Julian as a villain from every angle. Defeated, Julian retreated to the silent, cavernous penthouse. It felt haunted now. Every object, every piece of art seemed to mock him. He was surrounded by the trappings of a life he had destroyed. It was then that the final, most devastating blow was delivered. Not by courier, not by text, but by a crisp, formal email from Amelia's new lawyer, a notoriously tough litigator known as the Shark. The email outlined the initial terms of the divorce settlement. Amelia wanted nothing for herself but full ownership of her premarital assets and the establishment of an ironclad trust fund for their son. But it was a single paragraph in the middle of the legal jargon that made Julian's world stop spinning and then shatter completely. Further to the matter of child rearing and paternal rights, we wish to remind you that your son was conceived via in vitro fertilization, following 3 years of unsuccessful attempts and a confirmed diagnosis of your own male factor infertility. We have records of the extensive and costly procedures at the New York Fertility Institute, which you personally financed. Your obsession with having a biological heir is well documented. Amelia underwent grueling physical and emotional hardship to carry this pregnancy to give you the son you claim to so desperately want. Her actions at the party were the result of the discovery that while she was creating your legacy, you were actively betraying her and the future of the child you fought so hard to conceive. Any attempt to contest custody or shirk your financial responsibilities to this child will be met with the public disclosure of these medical facts, which we believe will further illuminate to any court or board of directors the depth of your character. Julian dropped his phone. It clattered onto the marble floor. Infertility. It was his deepest, most guarded secret, a shame that gnawed at the very core of his masculine pride. He, Julian Croft, the master builder, the titan, was flawed at a fundamental biological level. He couldn't create life on his own. All his bluster about legacy and dynasty was a cover for this profound insecurity. He had spent a fortune, put Amelia through hell with hormone injections and invasive procedures, all to get the one thing he felt he needed to validate his existence, a biological son. And he had succeeded. He had his miracle baby growing in the one woman who had stood by him. And he had thrown it all away. For what? For the thrill of a chase, for the ego boost of a younger, more exciting woman. He hadn't just cheated on his wife. He had betrayed the very miracle he had paid for. He had desecrated his own desperate prayer. The rage and defiance finally drained out of him, leaving behind a cold, empty void. He wasn't a king. He wasn't a titan. He was just a man, sitting alone in a monument to his own ego, having single-handedly demolished the only thing that had ever truly mattered. He had his empire of steel and glass, but he had turned his legacy to ash. 6 months later, the first snow of the season began to fall over New York City. It was not the biting, aggressive flurry of a blizzard, but a soft, hesitant descent of thick flakes, blanketing the sharp edges of the skyline in a forgiving layer of white. From the bay window of her brownstone apartment in the West Village, Amelia Croft watched the world outside quiet itself. The frantic honking of taxis seemed to soften, and the gray sidewalks slowly disappeared under a pristine coat. The air inside was warm, smelling of brewing coffee and baby powder. This apartment, a fraction of the size of the penthouse, was a sanctuary of genuine comfort. Sunlight, when it appeared, wasn't a harsh glare off sterile marble, but a warm stripe that fell across worn wooden floors. It was a space that held the sounds of life, the gentle hiss of an old radiator, the murmur of neighbors in the hallway, and the soft, rhythmic breathing of the tiny person sleeping in her arms. Her son, Leo, born 2 months prior in the calm of early autumn, was her anchor in her universe. He was small and perfect, his impossibly tiny hand curled trustingly around her index finger. As she looked down at his peaceful face, a wave of profound love, so fierce it was almost painful, washed over her. He was the miracle Julian had so desperately claimed to want, the legacy he'd been willing to pay a fortune for. But looking at Leo now, untainted by the drama of his conception, he was not a legacy or a symbol. He was simply her son. The past 6 months had been a maelstrom. The divorce had been a quiet, brutal affair of paperwork and lawyers' emails, a bloodless execution compared to the public spectacle that had preceded it. Faced with the irrefutable, humiliating truth of his infertility being made public, Julian had capitulated on every single term. He had fought, of course, through his lawyers with blustering threats and veiled accusations. But the fight had no heart. It was the death rattle of a defeated king. The professional fallout had been just as swift. The independent audit of Croft Holdings, triggered by her gift, had uncovered a pattern of significant financial irregularities and reckless leveraging, just as Chloe's contact had suggested. To avoid criminal charges and a complete implosion of the company, the board had forced Julian to sell a massive portion of his shares. He was stripped of his CEO title permanently, his control over his own empire reduced to that of a minor, silent shareholder. From her window, if she craned her neck, Amelia could just see the distant, needle-like tip of the Olympus Tower piercing the snowy sky. It was no longer his monument. It was a tombstone for his hubris, a permanent reminder of all he had lost. Amelia had heard through the legal channels that Julian remained a recluse in the silent, cavernous penthouse, a pariah in the city he once believed he owned. He had never asked to meet his son. The only contact was the series of sterile photos her lawyer was required to send once-a-month digital proof of the life that was growing up without him. Amelia felt a pang, not of pity or lingering affection, but of a distant, clinical sadness for the man he might have been, for the family they could have been, had his pride not been a more powerful force than his love. It was like looking at a photograph of a stranger who happened to share a piece of her history. A key turned in the lock, and Chloe breezed in, shaking snow from her purple hair and bringing a gust of cold, crisp air with her. She dropped a stack of mail on the antique wooden table Amelia had found at a flea market. "It's official," Chloe said, pulling off her gloves and pouring herself a mug of coffee. "The website for the foundation is live, and the donation alerts are going crazy. We've got over 300 in the first hour." She grinned, a rare, genuine smile that lit up her face. "Seems there are a lot of people out there who love a good revenge story." Amelia shifted Leo gently in her arms. "I hope they see it's more than that." "Oh, they do," Chloe said, her tone softening as she looked at her sister. "You're not just the woman who blew up her husband's life in a fancy box. You're the woman who is now using the rubble to build a fortress for others." It was true. The Croft Foundation for Family Integrity was no longer just an idea. It was a registered, functioning nonprofit with a clear mission: to provide expert legal aid and psychological support for women and children navigating high-conflict divorces, especially cases involving the kind of financial abuse and narcissistic manipulation she now understood so intimately. Her story had given her an unwanted platform, but she was determined to use it. The letters and emails had already started pouring in stories of hidden accounts, coercive control, and quiet desperation. In them, she saw echoes of her own past. Heard from a source, he put the penthouse on the market, Chloe said casually, scrolling through her phone. Guests rattling around a 10,000 square foot mausoleum finally lost its charm. It was never a home, Amelia said softly, her gaze returning to the window. It was a showroom for a life that didn't exist. She thought back to that night, to the heavy, terrible box. It was an act of profound destruction, a detonation designed to shatter a world built on lies. But it had also been an act of creation. It had cleared the ground. It had demolished a gilded cage and forced her to design a life of her own from the ground up. It's not a comeback, she said, the words feeling truer than ever. It's a new blueprint. Leo stirred in his sleep, a tiny, contented sigh escaping his lips. Amelia smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile that reached her eyes. Her empire wasn't made of steel and glass, designed to intimidate and impress. It was here, in the warmth of her small apartment. It was in the weight of her son in her arms, in the messages of hope on her laptop, in the quiet strength she now felt deep in her bones. It was an empire built not on ego, but on purpose. And unlike Julian's, it was built to last. So, what do we take away from the story of Amelia Croft's spectacular revenge? It's a powerful, modern fable about consequences. It shows that a person's true strength isn't found in wealth or power, but in courage and integrity. Amelia, pushed to the brink, didn't just crumble. She meticulously dismantled the man who betrayed her, not with hysterics, but with cold, calculated precision, using his own arrogance and symbols of their life as weapons. She proved that the most devastating blows aren't physical, but psychological. Her victory wasn't just in exposing Julian. It was in reclaiming her own narrative and building a new, more meaningful life from the ashes of his. What did you think of Amelia's revenge? Was the divorce gift a stroke of genius or a step too far? Could you ever forgive a betrayal like Julian's? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you love stories about drama, justice, and powerful comebacks, make sure you hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story.